On Thanksgiving, my brother said, "At least some of us are successful." Everyone laughed. I didn't respond, but just removed my name from the business line of credit he relied on. Now he's going into a dead end, and on Thanksgiving my brother lifted his wine glass, looked straight at me and said, "At least some of us are successful." Everyone laughed. I didn't. I just kept cutting my turkey like I hadn't heard him. My mom shook her head in that half-amused way she always does when Evan performs. My dad asked him about quarterly revenue. My aunt asked when he was opening his second location. No one asked me anything. That is how it has always been with Evan. He walks into a room and turns it into a stage. Growing up, he was the kid with the trophies, the startup ideas, the loud confidence. I was the quiet one who went into finance, worked long hours, never posted about it. According to him, I was risk-averse. According to our parents, I was steady. Evan started his logistics company 3 years ago. At every family gathering he gave updates nobody requested. Revenue milestones. Big clients. Photos with delivery vans wrapped in his logo. He loved saying things like, "I built this from nothing." The truth is he didn't. But no one at that table knew that. 2 years ago, when his second investor pulled out last minute, Evan called me at midnight. He said the bank would not extend his line of credit without stronger backing. He said if payroll bounced, the business would collapse before it even had a chance. He said he just needed someone to believe in him. I believed in numbers, not speeches. I asked for access to his books. He resisted for a day, then sent them over. I spent an entire weekend going through everything. The margins were thin. The contracts were aggressive. But the growth trajectory was real. He just did not have the liquidity to survive one bad month. So I offered a solution. I would not be a public partner. I would not attend launch parties. I would not have my name on the website. But I would secure the business line of credit with my personal assets and step in quietly as a private investor. 51% equity, non-voting publicly, full protective clauses privately. He did not even read the agreement carefully. He just signed. For 2 years I let him shine. I let him take interviews. I let our parents think he was a self-made genius. I stayed invisible, reviewing monthly financials and making sure the company stayed solvent. Every time he expanded too fast, I pulled him back. Every time he overspent on marketing, I restructured the budget. He never once thanked me in public. At dinner that night, after his little toast, he started telling my cousin that entrepreneurship is about courage, that not everyone is built for it. He glanced at me when he said that. I still did not react. Instead, I reached into my purse under the table and opened my banking app. The line of credit renewal was coming up in 10 days. It required my confirmation. I did not confirm it. I pressed decline. The screen asked if I was sure. I was. The thing about patience is that it feels endless until it ends all at once. Across the table, Evan was talking about expanding into 2 new states. He had already signed preliminary warehouse leases. He had ordered 6 more trucks. He had no idea that the operating capital he was counting on had just evaporated. Dessert came. Pie was served. My mother asked Evan to say grace for the blessings of success. He smiled like he always does. My phone buzzed under the table. It was an automated notification from the bank confirming that the guarantor had withdrawn. I locked my screen and took a bite of pie. Evan's phone buzzed about 30 seconds later. He glanced down, frowned slightly, and excused himself from the table. That was when I realized something I had not expected. He had already drawn against the next quarter's credit. And the bank does not send polite notifications when that happens. Evan did not come back to the table for 10 minutes. At first nobody noticed. My mom was arguing with my aunt about cranberry sauce. My dad was explaining interest rates to my cousin like he had invented them. I just watched the hallway. When Evan finally walked back in, he looked different. Not panicked. Not yet. Just confused. He picked up his glass again and tried to restart the conversation. He asked my dad about his golf trip. He asked my mom if she needed help clearing plates. It was almost convincing. Then his phone buzzed again. He stared at the screen longer this time. Mom asked if everything was okay. He said it was just a banking glitch. I almost admired that. Even when the ground shifts under him, Evan performs. Another buzz. Then another. He walked out again, this time faster. 5 minutes later my phone rang. I excused myself and stepped onto the back porch. It was cold enough that my breath fogged. I answered. "What did you do?" He did not even say hello. I told him I declined the renewal. You cannot just do that, Patricia. I can. I am the guarantor. Silence. He lowered his voice. I have payroll on Monday. The trucks arrive next week. The warehouse deposit's already cleared. I know. You're going to fix this. No. That word hung between us longer than the steam from my breath. He said I was overreacting. He said I was being emotional about a joke. He said I was sabotaging my own investment. I told him to check Section 8 of the operating agreement. The protective clause. The one about reputational harm and reckless expansion without majority approval. He was quiet for a second. Then he said he thought that was symbolic. It was not. He had signed 2 new state contracts without running them by me. He had committed to scaling before stabilizing. I found out through a supplier invoice, not from him. At Thanksgiving, when he made his little speech about courage, I realized something simple. He did not respect the risk I was carrying. My house was collateral on that line. My savings. Everything I built quietly over a decade. And he was gambling it to look impressive at dinner. He switched tactics. Patricia, please. Just reinstate it. We can talk after the holiday. I told him I had already triggered the withdrawal. The bank would freeze further draws and review the account first thing Monday. He started calculating out loud. If they freeze it, vendors stop shipments. If vendors stop, the contracts breach. If contracts breach, the penalty clauses kick in. If you are going to destroy this company. Oh, Evan. You did that when you decided you did not need to consult the person who owns most of it. The back door opened behind me. I turned. My dad was standing there. He must have heard enough. Destroy what company, Patricia? Evan did not know he was on speaker. I looked at my father, then back at the dark yard. Dad, I said, you should probably ask Evan who actually secures his line of credit. There was a long pause on the phone. Then Evan said don't. But it was too late. Because my father's face had already changed. My dad did not yell. That is what made it worse. He just said, put him on speaker. I did. Evan knew that tone. We all did. Dad asked one question. Who secures your line of credit? Silence. My mother stepped onto the porch behind him. She looked from me to him like she had walked into the wrong scene. Evan tried to redirect. He said it was just a misunderstanding with the bank. He said it would be handled. Dad repeated the question. Evan finally said my name. It sounded smaller than usual coming from him. Mom blinked. What does that mean? I told them the simple version. 2 years ago, the bank would not extend financing without a personal guarantor. I signed. I pledged my assets. I structured the operating agreement. I hold majority equity. Quietly. My mom looked like I had just told her I was secretly married. Dad asked how much. I told him the limit. He stopped, leaning against the railing. Inside the house, we could hear plates clinking and my cousin laughing at something. Felt far away. Evan started talking fast. He said I was framing it wrong. He said he built the business. He said I only helped with paperwork. I asked him who negotiated the supplier terms when diesel prices spiked last year. He did not answer. I asked who restructured the debt after his largest client delayed payment for 60 days. Silence again. Mom asked the question she always asks when she does not understand something. Why would you hide this from us? I told her I did not hide it. I just did not advertise it. Evan said I liked playing martyr. He said I enjoyed holding leverage over him. That almost made me laugh. If I enjoyed leverage, I would have used it sooner. Dad asked the only question that mattered. Why is the bank involved tonight? I told them Evan had expanded into 2 new states without board approval. He signed leases and vehicle contracts assuming the credit line would automatically renew. It did not. As I declined it. Mom stared at me like I had just detonated something. Evan cut in. You did this because of a joke at dinner. Well, I did this because you have been making decisions with my house on the line and pretending you are the only one taking risks. That was the first time he stopped arguing. From inside, my aunt called out that the pie was getting cold. Dad told Evan to come over. I heard his car door slam through the phone about 15 minutes later. When he walked into the house, he did not look at anyone. He went straight to Dad's office. We all followed. Dad closed the door. For the first time in my life, Evan did not sit in the chair like he owned the room. He stood. Dad asked to see the full financials. Evan hesitated. I said I already had them on my laptop. Evan turned to me. You brought them here. Yes. Because I had a feeling tonight might be the night we stopped pretending. I opened my laptop on Dad's desk and pulled up the most recent balance sheet. There was a red column I had not mentioned yet. Accounts payable had doubled in the last 6 weeks. Dad noticed it immediately. Why? Evan said it was temporary. I zoomed in. Several payments had been delayed to conserve cash ahead of the expansion. He had been juggling vendors to make the growth numbers look clean for a potential outside investor he had been pitching. Mom looked confused. Outside investor. Evan did not answer. I did. He has been shopping equity without telling me. That was when something shifted. Not in Evan. Dad. Because now it was not just risky. It was deceptive. And the worst part was still sitting in a folder I had not opened yet. I hesitated for half a second before clicking it. Personal withdrawals. The folder was labeled Owner Distribution Adjustments. Evan stepped forward when he saw it open. That is just standard compensation. Dad did not say anything. He just looked at the numbers. They were not standard. Over the last 8 months, Evan had been paying himself temporary reimbursements outside the structured salary we agreed on. They were rounded numbers. Clean transfers. 20,000 here. 15 there. Labeled as short-term loans. None of them had been repaid. Mom asked what she was looking at. I explained it slowly. The company was tight on liquidity. Vendors were waiting on payments. Expansion deposits were going out. And during that same window, Evan had quietly moved 6 figures into his personal account. Evan said it was bridge compensation. He said founders do it all the time. He said he planned to return it after closing a new investor. Dad finally spoke. Were you going to tell Patricia? Evan did not answer directly. He said it would have balanced out once the Series A came through. There was no Series A. I had reviewed the pitch deck. The interested investor was a regional angel group that had asked for audited statements. Statements that would now show irregular distributions and a frozen credit line. Dad sat down slowly. Mom asked where the money went. Evan said personal expenses. I already knew that was not true. 2 weeks earlier I had noticed a transfer from his personal account to a holding LLC I did not recognize. I pulled public records. The LLC had closed on a small commercial property across town. I turned the laptop toward them and opened the deed. Owner, Evan Miller Holdings LLC. Property type, mixed-use retail. Mom looked at him. You bought a building. He said it was an investment. Dad asked with what money. Evan tried to explain that it was strategic. That he planned to lease part of it back to his company later. That owning real estate would diversify his income. He forgot one detail. The down payment came 3 days after the company delayed payments to 2 major vendors. Dad looked at me. Is this legal? I told him it depends on whether the board approved related party transactions. He knew what that meant. It had not. The room felt smaller. Evan finally looked at me directly. You went digging. Yes. You wanted control. No. I wanted transparency. He laughed once, but there was nothing confident about it. You were waiting for me to slip. I shook my head. I was waiting for you to treat me like a partner instead of a silent safety net. Mom sat down across from him. How bad is it? I answered honestly. If the bank freezes the line and vendors stop shipments, contracts breach. If contracts breach, clients terminate. If clients terminate, revenue collapses within 30 days. Dad asked what happens then. I said the company would default. On what? Everything. Silence filled the office. Then Evan said something that surprised me. You would not let that happen. He said it like it was a fact. Not a plea. That is when I realized he still believed I would save him. He still thought this was a lesson, not an ending. He did not know about the clause I had activated that afternoon. The one that allowed majority equity to call an emergency restructuring vote. And I was not the only one who would be voting. Evan stared at me like I was bluffing. You cannot outvote me. I own this company. You run it, I said. That is different. He looked at Dad. Tell her this is insane. Dad did not move. I opened another document. The operating agreement he signed 2 years ago. Section 12. Emergency governance in the event of financial misconduct or material risk exposure. Majority equity can call an immediate vote to remove the managing member. Mom looked at me. Managing member means Evan. Yes. Evan shook his head. You would not do that. You do not even work there. That was the part he never understood. Ownership is not about who talks the loudest in meetings. I told him I had already notified the other silent stakeholders. His face changed. There were only two. A retired logistics executive named Carl and a small private equity advisor named Renee. Evan knew them as early supporters who wrote small checks. What he did not know was that both of them signed side letters giving me proxy rights if certain financial triggers were hit. Delinquent vendor payments. Undisclosed related party transactions. Unapproved expansion commitments. All 3 boxes were checked. Dad asked if they knew. I nodded. Carl called me an hour before dinner. He had received a notice from one of the vendors asking about payment delays. He was not amused. Evan pulled out his phone and started texting. Probably Carl. Did not matter. The vote was scheduled for Monday morning at 9. Mom asked what happens if he is removed. I answered calmly. We restructure. Freeze expansion. Liquidate the new trucks. Sublease the extra warehouse space. Negotiate vendor payment plans. Sell the commercial property to inject liquidity. Evan looked up fast. Sell it. If it was purchased with funds that should not have been withdrawn. It is the cleanest way to stabilize cash. He finally understood the direction this was going. You planned this. Well, I prepared for it. There is a difference. He said I was trying to humiliate him. I told him humiliation was making jokes about success while someone else carries your risk. Dad stood up. He looked at Evan, not me. Did you think she would never act? Evan did not answer. Mom asked the question that changed the entire tone of the night. If she had not stepped in 2 years ago, would this business even exist? No one spoke. Because everyone in that room knew the answer. Evan sank into the chair. For the first time since he started this company, he did not look like a founder. He looked like someone who had run out of exits. Then he said something I did not expect. What if I stepped down voluntarily? That was not part of my plan. I closed the laptop slowly. That depends, I said. On what? On whether you are ready to tell the truth publicly. He frowned. About what? About who actually built this. On Thanksgiving, my brother raised his glass and said, at least some of us are successful. Everyone laughed. I didn't. I just kept eating. Evan has always loved an audience. Growing up, he collected trophies. As an adult, he collects praise. His logistics company was his latest masterpiece, at least according to him. Every holiday came with a revenue update. What no one knew was that the company only existed because I signed for its line of credit 2 years ago. The bank would not approve it without a guarantor. I put up my savings in my house. In return, I took majority equity quietly. He signed the papers without reading much. At dinner that night, after his comment, I opened my phone under the table and declined the renewal on the credit line. 10 minutes later, his phone started buzzing. He stepped outside and called me. Asked what I had done. I told him I withdrew my guarantee. He had already committed to new warehouses and trucks, assuming that credit would roll over automatically. It wasn't about the joke. It was about the 6-figure temporary loans he had moved from the company into his personal account. About the commercial property he bought with that money. About the expansion he never cleared with me. Our dad overheard enough of the call to ask questions. That was how they all found out I owned most of the company. By Monday, I called an emergency vote using clauses he had ignored in the operating agreement. The other investors backed me. Evan resigned before we had to remove him. We froze expansion. Listed the building for sale. Renegotiated vendor payments. It was messy, but the business survived. Christmas, no one made jokes about success. Dad asked me how the quarter closed. I gave him the numbers. Evan stayed quiet. That was the first time the room felt honest.